All right, welcome to the live edition. We're going to go live today, but Julio Jones getting traded made it a necessity. We also totally changed our game plan here, but that's okay. More content, better content. This is the June 6th edition of the PFF Forecast, and this is going to be Julio Jones trade edition. We're going to go over it from every single angle. We're going to talk about my Falcons futures, whether I'm mourning. Are we crying or not, Eric? We'll discuss that. We'll talk Matt Ryan versus Ryan Tannehill, best duos in the NFL, what the betting markets look like right now, whether I bet on the Mavericks plus 6.5, and then some recommendations. So let's rock. I should say, I want to apologize. I said 15 minutes at 12 or at 3:15. I'm on the West Coast right now. And I had to reconnect Periscope to StreamYard. So I apologize. It's not on me. I got it done. Eric, I want to start off with this, though. We kind of knew that Julio was going to get traded. The Titans had moved up into the favorite position with a couple of other teams. What was your initial reaction? You see the trade, you see the compensation, first thing that goes through your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think we knew Julio. I mean, we knew later on, but I think early in the process, it was pretty like they don't want to do it and they're holding out for quite a bit. And then ultimately, once it ended up happening, like I know people who are like, we don't want to trade Julio. And ultimately, it soured so badly there that they ended up having to trade him. And I don't think the compensation was great, but the Titans did take on all of Julio's money, and the Falcons had put themselves in a position where they could not afford any of their draft picks. So, in that sense, I don't hate the move for Atlanta.
Really?
Would have liked to keep him there. Well, but the fact of the matter is like you couldn't. You had no flexibility on your team, right? At some point, once you sort of run the numbers, you're like,
whose fault is that? Like if we're doing the blame pie thing here, like where does that lie? Because it can't be Terry Font. Is it Terry Fontenot's fault? Should he have come in and immediately seen that? Is it Dimitrov, our buddy? Who do you think should bear the brunt of the blame for not being able to keep the best player that your franchise has seen in the past 20 years?
Well, I think it ends up being, I think the majority of it falls in Dimitrov's lap. And while, I think that that's a little bit negative, you can see sort of where he's coming from in the sense of, he almost took a team to the Super Bowl title twice. And when that didn't work, like they kind of like kept trying to put the band back together. And there were like these weird fits and starts. Like 2019, they finished the season 6-2, right? They made a change of coordinators on the defensive side of the ball. They got better. And it always it could have stood to reason, right? A team that was losing a lot of close games every single year that eventually would all come together. And that ended up just simply not happening. And then when that happened, the next guy ended up holding the bag. Now, Fontenot had a decision to make. He had a few decisions to make, right? The one of them was, which one of these contracts do you sort of like extend and restructure? I think Ryan probably was going to have less of a market than Julio Jones relative to expectations. So Ryan was probably easier to go to the table with and say, look, we want to extend you, give us some flexibility. Julio, no such sort of, no such ability there. But also, like, they made the decision not to draft Justin Fields, right? So there are some decisions they've made post Dimitrov that you could say led them to this point. But I don't blame Fontenot really at all, for this the larger situation that they're in. Some of the decisions they've made sense, you could permute through them, but as we said on the podcast before, all the outcomes were going to be bad for them.
Okay, that was kind. Did you go to church today? The Holy Spirit is within you. This is like, that was very tame. And I was worried that we were going to come in and both bash the Falcons. I have a list of winners here. I'm going to start with the losers here. This is just, we finally thought the Atlanta Falcons were going to turn the corner. In fact, someone in the I'm going to show this again here. I said, I think the Falcons have the best offense in the NFL. They had a chance, and they peed it down their leg. I mean, and this is a disaster. The Atlanta Falcons, you talk about cursed franchises, and you've seen it in baseball. with the Cubs and stuff like that. The Falcons are, this is the city of Atlanta, like, deserves better than this. This is a disaster, in my opinion. And I don't think that you can, like, I agree with you in that you probably can't place the blame squarely on certain people. But for Terry Fontenot to come in there and not look at the holistic picture of this offense and go, okay, I'm going to draft Kyle Pitts. What does this mean for my team going forward? And to not see the writing on the wall and go, if I have to trade Julio Jones, I am in a rebuild. And if I'm in a rebuild, I need to either trade down or I need to take a quarterback, or do both. And or if I have to trade Julio Jones, I got to do it before the draft. Like, there are so many things here that I think were mismanaged. I think the biggest loser here by a country mile, are the fans of Atlanta. And I'm not saying that just because I bet on the Falcons. I actually still like our bet, because we got them at 7 over 7 minus 143. I still like that. I still think they're a good team. I still think Matt Ryan can be, with Arthur Smith, a top 10, top 12 quarterback. But this is a disaster for the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, if it weren't for 28-3, this would be, I think, the biggest loss, the biggest L that the Falcons have taken.
It's the end of an era, but it's not like
they drafted a tight end at number 4, Eric.
I know,
Jamar Chase was on the board. Justin Fields was on the board. You think Matt Ryan has a future right now?
But they weren't going to. They had to do something to Matt Ryan and Julio's deal. They might not have had, like, look, if Julio was this much of a, we want out of here, right? Then, like, the fact of the matter is, like, they had to do this. Like, Dante Fowler's deal was egregious. They could not move on from literally anybody. They, like, we talking about, like, trading their left tackle to the Jaguars or something just to free up cap space. Yes, they could have gotten rid of Deion Jones. They could have done a lot of other things. And yes, I'm not saying that, like, they've made the optimal choice here, but none of their choices were optimal. And even taking Justin Fields, which I think we will ultimately would have supported, even if they would have gone into the season with Ryan's humongous deal, right, the $40 million cap hit or whatever, and gotten rid of Deion Jones and all that kind of stuff, you still you lose 25% of the edge of getting a rookie quarterback there. And so would they come up from air here? And it's like, okay, they still have 2 elite weapons on their team, which is what they had a season ago.
Well,
they're still not great defensively.
So you're calling Kyle Pitts elite and Calvin Ridley, now wide receiver 1, also
we
elite.
have Calvin Ridley as generating the most receiving yards in the NFL this year. In our projections, they also have to pay Ridley at some point.
Yep.
And when you look, I mean, last season you're talking about a 90 catch, 1,300 yard, almost 1,400 yard receiver. He's something that, look, like I said, I don't think this is good for them. Like, I would have wished things have gotten better, but this is something where the Falcons should have been rippable long ago, and not necessarily today. I think they're picking up a mess and doing so in a way, like, not necessarily the way I would have done it, but they're doing it in a way that makes some sense. And getting all of Julio's deal into Tennessee's hands.
That's a fair point.
That's a good, to me, like, again,
that's a really good point.
They have to do. And I don't hate the bet for this season. And as we know, every single season, there's a Joe Burrow, there's a Zach Wilson, there's a Kyler Murray. Every single year, there's a quarterback. We always say, oh, the next quarterback class sucks. And it's like, okay, but that happens every single year, right? And so we give so much certainty to the guys like Fields, and we give less to the Rattlers and the dudes the next year. Mm-hmm. And the Falcons, if they bottom out, like they're certainly able to do, like, they'll have a chance to pick one of those guys next year.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of comments here about, like, okay, this isn't a disaster, like Julio isn't a one-man team. Dude, the guy is a top 3 receiver when he's on the field. So, yes, he's not a one-man team, certainly, but there are a ton of question marks. Like for you to, and I think Ridley will be great. He's a fantastic route runner. We really liked him coming out of Alabama. All of the research that we did, that was one of the first years that we did draft research. But there is uncertainty there. He played alongside Julio Jones, the number one weapon that every team was trying to stop like by a mile, right? And that is a question mark. Kyle Pitts is a question mark. Matt Ryan's downfield accuracy, as we'll talk about in a little bit, it is a question mark. I want to move, though, to
Julio Jones' ability to stay on the field for 16 games.
But that's always been a question mark. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. But for this team, like here's what I'll say. Long term for the team, this is good because they have so much more flexibility. They'll have an opportunity. Like, what happens if there's a team, like, let's say they're contending this year, and there's a team like Minnesota that wants to trade Yannick Ngakoue in the middle of the season.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many teams in the NFL that don't have any flexibility. The Falcons have put themselves in position to have some. And long term, like, that's a humongous, like, the Julio Jones situation was a humongous ball and chain for something that, yes, is an amazing football player, but does come with appreciative risk, which is that he might not play a lot. He might just be like, there are some games where he's active, but he doesn't get any targets and he has to sit out the whole second. Like, there's a lot of things for like a growing team like this. Like, none of us are saying they're going to win the South. And I think maybe they've come to those terms and they're saying, look, if we just want to like find out if Ridley can be a number one, that's the year. We're going to find out if Kyle Pitts can be like this horse that we have to ride for the next 3-4 years because we don't have great wide receiver depth underneath Ridley. They're going to be able to find that out better without Julio. And can Matt Ryan, this was like Stafford, like, right? When Calvin Johnson leaves, what kind of player is Stafford? And with Matt Ryan, it's sort of like, okay, when Julio's gone, like for long term, and the whole offense isn't built around the guy, like what is Matt Ryan for the next 2 years? Because like I think that's also a question that they'll be able to better answer this year when, frankly, for them, the situation is low stakes.
Yeah, it's a good point. You've evened me out a little bit, although it just sucks. It
does suck. And if you're a Falcons fan, and that circling this over to Tennessee, I don't want to be negative about Tennessee today as much because if I'm a Titans fan, I'm extremely excited about this. I think it's awesome that you end up with AJ Brown, you end up with Julio Jones. So I don't want anything that we say about the Titans to come off as negative because acquiring Julio Jones is a super positive move. And as I said a couple weeks ago, I think it is the move that can turn their offseason from being, in my estimation, an unmitigated disaster to being merely like water treading, which I think it does. What do you think about this for Tennessee?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to answer this by going over who I think the biggest winners in this trade were. I think that the third, I'm going to go in reverse order, top three. The third is Julio Jones. I initially felt that I think Matt Ryan with Julio and Ridley and Pitts and Arthur Smith could have had a Ryan Tannehill-esque, kind of recovery, if you will. He has not been as good, but he was 6th overall in raw PFF grade per snap last year from a clean pocket. His accuracy is still top 10. And looking at the numbers a little bit last year, you do see some signs of, okay, the pinpoint accuracy on deep balls has not been there for Matt Ryan. And Ryan Tannehill at least has shown that now, albeit in a much smaller sample size. The sample sizes are not large. So I do think this is a good move for Julio. I also believe that AJ Brown being Calvin Ridley is such a great complementary piece to Julio because of his size, the things that he does a little differently. AJ Brown is a tank. Like he can handle so much from a physical standpoint. And I think that helps Julio Jones. Okay, so he's number 3. Number 2, it's the Tennessee Titans. And for the reason that you said, you are trying to win a Super Bowl. I agree with you that on average, this might not be as great a move because there's a lot of volatility there. Julio Jones' ability to stay on the field, no Arthur Smith anymore. Those are big things. But if Julio is healthy in the playoffs and they make it there, Eric, they could beat anybody. That's the type of thing that you're looking for. And so I think they're the number 2 winner. And so I agree with you from a look. Julio is not someone that you can count on to stay on the field nearly as much. Arthur Smith and that offense, they ran play action 36% of the time. They had the most efficient offense on first and second downs when throwing the football. That was a lot of Arthur Smith. It's going to be interesting to see what that looks like without him. And then I think the biggest winner, honestly, it's the NFL. Like, to bring Julio Jones and have him get traded because he wanted to get traded, I think it's awesome for the league. The fact that players are moving more, I think, is great. The storylines are great. You're creating contenders in places that you might not have created them before. So I think overall, like, we're the biggest winners. And I know it's cliche to say, but like, I really do think this is a good thing for the NFL long term.
Yeah, I think so. Here's my thing about the Julio. Like, I think Julio on average is a great acquisition. If I'm thinking about how to handicap Tennessee, I'm adding like maybe a quarter to a half a win from something that was pretty low to begin with. And I got a lot of flack for this online, but I think they were very much like a Minnesota Vikings last year type team to me, where like you look at, and I'm pulling up the numbers now, like Todd Downing's their offensive coordinator. Todd Downing literally had the 32nd highest offensive coordinator ranking in 2017, the year that he was with the Raiders. So you're going from Arthur Smith, who's a let's say top 10 guy, conservatively. And then when Downing had his turn at the plate for the Raiders, he was the worst in the NFL. He was worse than Dowell Loggins. It goes 30th is Adam Gase, 31 is Dowell Loggins, 32 is Todd Downing. We're talking about going from one of the elite offensive minds in all of football to a middling guy at best and probably one of the worst, right? So you have that, and that was very similar. Minnesota, got rid of Stefanski, going into last season. You lose Adoree Jackson, you lose Malcolm Butler, you lose Desmond King, who I know didn't play great for them, but like was at least there. And their defense was already bad to begin with. Then you also, like, the Vikings acquired Yannick Ngakoue, who is like a bad pass rusher, but somehow gets sacks. And like our guy, Pittsburgh Steeler guy, Bud Dupree, is a bad pass rusher that somehow gets sacks. And so he goes to a new environment where like he's supposed to be the pass rusher. I don't see it going very well. And then you lose Jonnu Smith still. You don't have, like, who's the Vikings number 3 receiver? Chad Beebe? Who's the number 3 receiver? They don't even have Khalif Raymond on the team anymore. Like, they literally don't have a third wide receiver. It's like Josh Reynolds, right? I bet you Josh Reynolds really wishes he would have chosen the Chiefs for $100,000 less, by the way. So I look at that team and I'm thinking to myself, like, they better have gotten Julio, right? Because they were going to be bad if they didn't. And now I merely think that they're going to be like a middling team that, yes, as you said, if they get into a playoff game with an elite team and all the things click, they can win. But if the wheels come off, right? Tannehill by the way, 2017, who was Adam Gase? Well, I'd say Adam Gase's third worst play call in the NFL. Who was his QB?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking to myself, there are a lot of people. There was the guy Dobb who tweeted out that like Tannehill's stats are better than Mahomes' the last 24 games. By the way, be aware of end pointing. Yeah, and it's like, yes, but you can't untangle what Tannehill's done from what Arthur Smith's doing.
Also, there's one of the really interesting things about Ryan Tannehill and his performance has been they really do a great job of protecting Ryan Tannehill. Now, he's made some great throws, certainly. But that scheme and the way they leveraged play action, and also they were so run heavy, it put Tannehill in an opportunity, gave him an opportunity to perform in situations that were very skewed towards high production, right? And I think that's the kind of worry here is like, okay, what if those situations are not as beneficial? I think that's the issue there. I did find this interesting, and I want to talk a little bit about like Ryan versus Ryan, Tannehill versus Matt Ryan, because I thought this was interesting. So I looked at throws 30 plus yards downfield, because I think 20 plus, like, you get some of those things over the middle. It's not necessarily like throwing the deep ball per se. So I looked at 30 plus yards. Ryan Tannehill only had 19 throws that traveled 30 plus yards downfield. To give you comparison there, Russell Wilson had 48. Aaron Rodgers had 40. And Ryan Tannehill was really accurate. He was the most accurate in terms of perfectly placed passes because we chart that right, drops it right in the breadbasket, right in stride. 44% of his throws were right on the money. That was the best in the NFL. Now, Matt Ryan was way down there. He was only 17%. So you get this small sample size. I get that. But do you think that Ryan, like, what's your expectation for Ryan Tannehill this year? Like, do you think that he is a significant upgrade for Julio over Matt Ryan?
No. I look, and this again, I don't know what you call it. Like somebody said regression slaves or whatever in the fantasy football community. I don't like that usage, but like regression is the name of the game in fantasy football, right? We have so right now our projections have Tannehill 4,400 yards, 25 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. 4,400 yards, I believe, would be his career high. It was last year. He had a terrific season. No one's going to take anything away from him. He had 3,800 yards,
highest graded quarterback,
and 33 touchdowns. Like he's going to regress a little bit just on the touchdown end. Now we have Ryan with 4,700 yards and 29 touchdowns. Again, a lot of that is us just simply, and somebody I know one of the comments, on the screen, like laughed at the idea that Arthur Smith is good. We're talking about a Titans offense that was awful with Marcus Mariota for like 3-4 years, or like middle of the pack at best. And now you're talking like Derrick Henry did not go from like a bum to like amazing on his own. Like Tannehill's there. Corey Davis emerged and got a contract because of him. AJ Brown as well, extremely good efficiency. You take Arthur Smith away and you put him on Matt Ryan. You add in the pass happiness. I got to look at what we have for attempts, because I do think that matters. Like we have Matt Ryan with 619 attempts, which is third in the NFL. We have Tannehill all the way down at 521 attempts. So that is, again, we're sort of assuming Downing's going to keep the run heaviness to that offense, and the pass happiness will stay in Atlanta without, Derrick Henry. And as such, like I think Arthur Smith's going to be really good for Atlanta. And I think Matt Ryan might not be as physically good as Tannehill anymore, but I think you add the coordinator there, and he's certainly in that tier that can be amazing, even though he might have lost it a little bit. I mean, we're talking about Tannehill as Tannehill was traded for what, like a 7th round pick or some sort of like mid-round pick after Adam Gase was done with him. Like we're not like, these things are not necessary. It's not egregious to say they're as interchangeable. Now, Tannehill, I think, has gotten better enough where you can assume that even with a downgraded coordinator, he's still going to be good. Like we're not assuming he's going to have like, Drew Lock numbers, but I don't think it's fair to have expectations of him that are, you're the best passer in football or one of the best passers in football, like he's been over the past 2 seasons.
Yeah, so he, top 5 graded passer last year. But here's the color that I want to give to this. It's important. First and second down throws without play action. He had 201 such dropbacks. Players that had more: Gardner Minshew, Sam Darnold, Drew Lock.
Players that aren't playing very much.
Yeah, he had the 26th most, 7th fewest dropbacks without play action on first and second down. So that's a big part of it. And you think about play action, like that's scheme, So if you're looking at where that falls off, I think it's important to know that the offensive coordinators are going to matter in this situation. So I mean, I don't want to bag on Ryan Tannehill. I actually have kind of like started to come around a little bit, but you do need to understand that like scenario and situation are super important.
2016, Matt Ryan with play action. Tannehill was something like 13 yards per attempt in 2019 with play action. Matt Ryan in 2016, his MVP season with play action, he had the 163 dropbacks. That was the most in the NFL, 12 more than Andy Dalton did. He averaged 11.3 yards per attempt, which led the NFL as a half a yard more than Ryan Fitzpatrick. By the way, that was Ryan Fitzpatrick's bad Jets year. It just shows you that with play action, it sort of evens the playing field so much, even for a bad Fitzpatrick. And 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 11 big-time throws. 11 big-time throws actually doesn't seem like that many, but again, play action opens up the game so that you don't have to make big-time throws to make as many sort of chunk plays on offense. And again, this is Ryan just a few years ago, certainly capable, in my opinion, of doing the same thing if given the freedom to do so here.
Yeah, still, if you go to pff.com, you can get all of the updates to the individual player projections. You can dig into those with an Edge subscription. You can also get the quarterback annual, and you can go take a look. So we talked about how, at PFF we're charting the ball location accuracy of throws, and you can look at where Matt Ryan is versus Ryan Tannehill. And what's really interesting is Matt Ryan is still elite throwing the intermediate throws. Where it is falling off a little bit are some of those 20-plus yard throws. But that, to me, is also indicative of a really poor scheme. Like, they were behind a lot. He was having to drop back and not use play action. And, those are just harder throws to make. So that is also important to recognize and realize. And you can go check that out and dive into it as much as you want. So let's take a look at this now from Julio and AJ Brown on the same team, both healthy. You are a Chiefs fan, but we're both pragmatic in our assessments here. I have an opinion here, but where would you put healthy Julio and AJ Brown as a duo in the NFL?
Somebody made a joke and said the Bills Mafia is upset about their non-inclusion in your tweet. And I, of course, made a joke about needing to be
I'll address that. I'll address that here in a second.
I made a joke about needing to be vaccinated to be a part of the group. But
listen, John Rahm.
Anyway, so look, they're great. And we've never seen this in Tennessee. I made this. There's a stat that's interesting. The last time the Titans gave 100 or more targets to two separate wide receivers on the same team was Kendall Wright and Kelly Washington. No, not Kelly Washington. Nate Washington, the former Steeler.
Yeah.
And that's 2013. And their second wide receiver has been in the 60 target range. Last year, Corey Davis was under 100 still. So it's going to be a change for them. But we do see this. We have AJ Brown in the 1,200 yard range. He's never really done that in the NFL. And we have Julio in the sort of the 1,000 yard range because, again, there's uncertainty about his health. There's, he's never been the number 2 receiver before, that type of thing. But I do think it's going to be a good duo. And I think, as far as duos in the NFL, Kelsey Hill, I think, have to be up there. I think whoever is the top 2 players for Tampa Bay have to be up there. And people give a shit for having Antonio Brown there, but Antonio Brown's absolutely great. Godwin and Evans might be up there. Thielen and Jefferson in Minnesota, I think, have a shot. Thielen's getting older and a little creakier, but I think Jefferson's the best receiver in that entire discussion. Mm-hmm. Those are, but it's close, and it's certainly the best pair that Tannehill's ever had as an NFL player.
Yeah, you look at, by the way, Corey Davis last year was a top 10 graded wide receiver. So the opportunity is going to be there if they just, if they have that same offensive scheme. Now that we talked about that being a question mark, here's how I would rank it. I would put Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce at 1A. And the reason I put them at 1A is I believe they both have elements that no one else in the league can match. And they're so perfectly complementary. Tyreek Hill has the best, deep speed in the NFL. He's also incredibly elusive after the catch. And Travis Kelce owns that intermediate part of the field, the middle of the field, but is also really dynamic and shifty. You can move them all over. And I think Julio Jones and and AJ Brown have a chance to be very similar in that they can do anything. And both those guys are elite at whatever they're trying to do. And that's how I would think about the duos is each of the pairs in the duo has to have an elite skill that's top 5, top 3. And so that's why the Bills, look, I said this about the Packers too. You take Devontae Adams and put any average player next to him. You put Stephon Diggs out there and put any average player out there next to him. And you have a really good duo, okay? Does Cole Beasley have something that no other player or very few players in the NFL have? No. Does Emmanuel Sanders? No. Does whoever the number 2 guy in Green Bay? No, absolutely not. So please get off my lawn. If you want to talk about trios, then absolutely. You have, Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders. You have the Tampa Bay guys. And I think that's where you have to kind of back off a little bit. So then I go 3 and 4, and I think this one's really close. I would put, it's so tough because I think Godwin and or Brown and or Evans, any combination of those two, both have, like Evans and Brown in particular, I think have something elite that they do. And Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, very similar, although not quite as much as you mentioned for Thielen. So those would be the groups that I put in 3 and 4. But I just think Julio and AJ Brown, if you're lining up against them and they're both healthy, like you're just about as scared as you are when you face Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, regardless of the quarterback, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'll say this right now. The canary in the coal mine is the Arthur Smith being taken out for Todd Downing. Like, I don't know, man. Like, it's very similar to what the Raiders had. 2016, they had Crabtree playing amazingly. They had, they had good receiver. I'm blanking. Derek Carr, quote unquote MVP candidate. And they changed guys, and it just felt, like I think when you have a quarterback that's not above a certain threshold, changing coordinators has a humongous effect. And I think my thesis for this entire show has been it's going to have a positive effect on Matt Ryan that people I don't think are projecting enough to overcome this loss of Julio, I think. And I think we have to temper expectations of the wide receivers in Tennessee because of it. It'd be because a coordinator who can make Corey Davis go from a complete and utter bust to a very good receiver can certainly his absence can make Julio Jones go from one of the league's best receivers to merely good.
What do you think now about the kind of schematics of the league? So there's a couple ways to look at this. The first is Tom Brady comes to the NFC South, and people are fleeing like the plague. Drew Brees drops off a cliff. You've got
really
people get mad about that. Yeah. Julio Jones now leaves. Aaron Rodgers wants to leave. It's honestly impressive. So you've got that side of things. But then I think maybe the bigger one is you look at the AFC South, which not a strong division. Carson Wentz and the Indianapolis Colts plus 110 to win. The Tennessee Titans now also plus 110 to win. Titans are 25-1 to win the Super Bowl. Does this do any of those, or is there an impact in your mind on like the pecking order in the NFL and who has, who's a good bet to win the Super Bowl?
Yes, in the sense that I think Tennessee does deserve to be firmly in that sort of third AFC group. Like I have, Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, Cleveland, sort of in the elite group in the AFC. And then I think after that, it's Indy, Tennessee, and Miami. I'm putting Indy and Miami in there despite their quarterback questions because I think that they're sort of elite organizations. Tennessee sort of is in that group because I think while they have elite talent, they're so fragile on the defensive side of the ball, as I said, with coordinator change, and then also depth. Like their depth on the offensive line isn't great. Depth at wide receiver isn't great. Depth at tight end isn't great. And they depend so heavily on a running back when we know that running backs, while elite play at the running back position has been stable the last 2 years, there's no evidence to suggest that Derrick Henry is going to be all that great for all that much longer. So I think that Tennessee firmly puts himself in that group as opposed to the Pittsburgh, Los Angeles Chargers, Denver, kind of depending upon what happens at QB. That like tertiary group to me does no longer includes Tennessee after this week.
So if I were thinking about this, I'm looking at, let's just look at chance to win the AFC. Kansas City plus 250 is on DraftKings Sportsbook. And then you've got the Bills and the Ravens, both about 6-1. I think the Browns are the Browns are in a weird like third tier by themselves, where I have a lot more confidence in Stefanski, and that team is robust. Like you think about, and you mentioned this, like the thinness of the Titans is the worry. players go down, like who is stepping in for them? The Browns, obviously everyone's, if their quarterback goes down, they're screwed. But like the Browns could suffer an injury at just about any position and still, be a contender.
Well, they did.
I think, right. Well, that's my point. Yeah. So I think that's how I would have the pecking order. And then you think about the Colts and the Titans, and this is the one that I really want to debate here. I would put the Titans ahead of the Colts right now. And I know that Frank Reich deserves a ton of credit. I love Frank Reich, but we're giving the Colts a lot of credit for being a solidly run organization where they don't have a lot of players where you go, man, that guy's really good.
Yeah.
Like defensively, they have, Darius Leonard is really good. But like you look at the offensive side of the ball and your best player is your guard. Yeah, and Quentin Nelson's amazing, but like, is that what is going to carry you to winning a conference championship? Absolutely not. And so I look at that division and I go, the Titans should be the favorite. If I had to pick one of those two teams, I would take the Titans. I'm not sure at plus 110 I want to, but if I would think about it because I think that's mispriced. Like I think it's ridiculous that the Colts have a better chance to win that division. Just because if you think about it and you go, okay, like Julio Jones comes back and he plays, say, 12 games, and you kind of get average injury luck. Yeah. To me, it's the Titans division to lose. From a Super Bowl perspective, I think it's interesting. They're 25-1. Again, same odds as the Colts and the Seahawks and the Broncos. Packers, Browns, Niners, Ravens have better, Rams have better odds. Like I do think that we see that move maybe up a little bit as we go on here, because it's just like if you think about who could actually win a Super Bowl, at least if they're healthy, to me, they have a slimish chance. Whereas I really don't think the Colts do.
Let me give you the Carson Wentz pitch because
Please.
I'm not a huge Carson Wentz fan. I really never have been. But let me give you a little bit of an anecdote into why I understand the Colts love on the marketplace.
Okay.
2019, which was 2 years ago. These are the guys that led the Eagles in targets. Zach Ertz 135, Dallas Goedert 87. So your top two guys are tight ends. Mm-hmm. Alshon Jeffrey 73, Nelson Aguilar 69, Miles Sanders 63, Greg Ward 40, Boston Scott 26, JJ Arcega-Whiteside 22, Mac Hollins 22, and then a bunch of shit. Mm-hmm. Carson Wentz that season had, I believe, no wide receiver crack 500 yards in the season. Went 64% completion, 7 yards per attempt, which isn't great. Don't get me wrong, but and 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 9-7 record with a ratty ass offense. And the one thing they did have is protection. And the Colts, I don't love their skill position, although Jonathan Taylor was pretty damn good last year. Nyheim Hines is a very good all-around running back. Tight end Doyle, I think, is a good football player. Pittman should emerge, and T.Y. Hilton comes back. Like, they're not completely awful there. If Wentz gets the protection and sort of gets over the yips, I do think that this is a bimodal outcome for the Colts. I can see them being like 4-13, and then this is the last time Wentz ever plays in the NFL. Like, I could see that happening totally. But if things come together, we've seen more seasons where Wentz has made chicken salad out of chicken shit than we've seen like last season where he was the worst passer in football for stretches of time. So that's where I'm kind of like, where I talk about regression with Ryan and regression with Tannehill. I'm thinking about some mean reversion for Wentz here that doesn't have him looking as awful as he was a season ago.
Yeah. So, okay. But let me regression to average. Like here's how I break it down. It's like, how will Carson Wentz improve enough, and will Todd Downing decline the Titans offense enough that those two lines cross? And I don't know. I would hope that Todd Downing copied Arthur Smith's playbook before he left. Mm-hmm. And I think that's your hope.
But they're such a solid team, though. Like, I looked at this, I saw this the other day.
They're solid, but they're not. they don't have any superstars.
Yeah, but does that, and I guess this sort of contradicts it because the Colts did lose to the Jaguars last year. They were the one team that did so. But like in a division where they're basically handing you, well, for one, you have a second place, you have 3 games against second place teams, whereas the Titans are associating with 3 teams that are first place. And when it comes to that in the AFC, it might not be that big of a deal, Pittsburgh versus Baltimore, but Kansas City versus, I think, Las Vegas is a big deal. And then the other thing, like I look at statistics and I think I agree. Like the Colts don't have anybody amazing on defense except for like DeForest Buckner and Darius Leonard, but they're also just like they don't make mistakes. Like they had the second fewest missed tackles in the NFL last year behind the Los Angeles Chargers. Their special teams are almost always good. They're like they don't have these humongous coverage busts that'll like the Titans are going to be awful in the back end this year. Like pandemic offseason-ish, all your corners gone. Like there are going to be leaks there. Whereas I think Indianapolis is not going to be able to touch Tennessee. Like remember the game in Indianapolis where the Titans just absolutely had their A+ game? Colts couldn't touch that. But in the game on that Thursday night in Nashville, where the Titans made mistake after mistake after mistake, Indianapolis was able to win that game by 17 because they just simply don't make those boneheaded plays. And so I think if Carson Wentz can play in a confidence interval that is like narrow, then I think the Colts can be better than people think.
Yeah, it's the argument is obvious. It's do you believe in solidness throughout the roster without superstars? Or do you believe in superstars? Because the Titans have 3 to 4. Derrick Henry is a superstar now. His impact on the game is not as big as people think. But Julio Jones and AJ Brown, both superstars, and Ryan Tannehill been a top 5 graded quarterback each of the last 2 seasons. So that's where I will land. I will land on that one. Before we get into our recommendations here. What's your feeling on any bets either to be made or bets that we have made? Like one that I'm thinking about is, I bet Titans not to make the playoffs at plus money. I don't know how great I feel about that. Not great. We bet obviously the Falcons over 7 at minus 143. Would have still betted at over 7.5, which it is right now at minus 135. What's your take there?
Well, here's the thing. I think what's interesting is those markets that were moved in your direction a decent amount where now this move is not going to necessarily be enough to make the bet awful. You know what I mean? Like the Titans not to make the playoffs. I have to look at what I got it at. But it ended up being like a decent value and now like, sure, they'll have higher odds, but I don't think it's going to be as bad. Let me look at what I ended up with. To miss playoffs, I had it at plus 125, and then current price. So this was May 22nd when I updated. It was minus 103. So like you were getting 28 cents of value there. It's probably now going to be something like plus 130, plus 140. But again, it's not nearly as bad because you were on the right side before this move. And I think the Falcons are the same way, where if you bet them over 7 at minus 143, like it was the best of it when it was 7 minus 150 or whatever. And now it's merely just a good bet now that 7.5 minus 130 or so. So I don't think it's that bad. I think people were starting to sour on Tennessee prior to this move. And while it might not be the best of it anymore, it's still not egregious. So I'm okay with that. I think now you do have to consider like waiting on Tennessee. If you like under, it's 126 on Pinnacle, under 9. Like I think you have to wait a little bit, mate. Even if it like the index goes to 9.5, that might be the best opportunity if you are inclined to like them under. I don't think I think all of the Titans are going to be bad MVP bets because like one of them has to win it. And it's not going to be a running back or wide receiver. You really think Ryan Tannehill is going to win the MVP? So I think those are all sucker plays. I know some people are touting those on Twitter. But that's kind of where I see it. I don't see a huge deal. I think Pitts is going to be overvalued in the offensive rookie of the year market. And I think Ryan at 75 to 1, that bet that we're holding on to for him to be MVP, I think weirdly this makes that an even better play in the sense that if he overcomes this trade and plays as well as he did in 2016,
yes,
the media might be more inclined to give him the MVP than if he had, Julio as well as Ridley and Pitts. So while I think it makes it less likely that he'll have an amazing season, I think it makes it more likely that given he has an amazing season, they'll give him the award.
Yes, that was going to be my thing. So right now on DraftKings Sportsbook, Matt Ryan is 40-1. Ryan Tannehill is 25-1. I know this sounds ridiculous, but I would rather bet Matt Ryan at 40-1 than Ryan Tannehill at 25-1 for exactly what you said. For those guys to win, they have to have an out of this world season. But if Matt Ryan has one without Julio Jones, that would mean obviously Kyle Pitts breaking out and like those things. But I would probably wait. I think that number should come down quite a bit. I still think from an MVP perspective, my favorite bet is Tom Brady, who's 14-1. You can find about 15-1 in some places. I think that is absolutely banana land ridiculous that he has worse odds than Josh Allen, about the same odds as Lamar Jackson and Matt Stafford.
Do you think that that's just because, much like a season ago, now Mahomes didn't deserve the MVP, but Mahomes kind of got lost in the shuffle in that their team was so much better than any other AFC team that the games were sort of like ho-hum. Like no one remembers their win against Carolina. No one remembers their win against Atlanta. All that, and he didn't play well in that game. Whereas when you look at, when you look at Rodgers, he was sort of in these high-profile games that got flexed. Like the Tennessee game got flexed. The Chicago game was either already Sunday Night Football or got flexed. Like he was put in limelight a lot. Does Tom Brady's MVP case suffer from the likelihood that Tampa could cruise through the NFC in a very nondescript way against teams like Atlanta, New Orleans, Carolina that we aren't going to put on primetime TV? Like, is that's the one, like, I think leak in the Tom Brady bet. But if they're at all contested, I mean, Brady's going to put up great numbers this year, I think.
My counter to that is that the league is going to flex every Tom Brady is on a tear game in anywhere they can. And yes, the ones against Atlanta, New Orleans, and Carolina aren't going to be them, but every other game is a legit candidate. I would argue that as powerful as Mahomes is, the Brady thing is on another level. Like the fact that he's this old doing this, he's so popular in terms of what he does on social media. Like it will snowball. And remember, this is partially like a popularity contest. So that's my argument there. I don't think that I don't think you're smart if you're touting Tennessee now as like a good bet in a lot of places. Like people are rushing to those. The only thing that I would say is like I would side Titans, you would side Colts, but that would be where I would land. And I'm not going to put more money on the Falcons. I'm not going to get out of those positions at all. And I might wait for the Titans team to increase if I were thinking of betting under there. Let's close out with this recommendation station. Your brainchild, a fantastic addition to the show. What it is, if you're first time listening, we are trying to give out recommendations based on things that we've used or things that we've done that have been helpful for us. When we have guests on, we ask them to do the same. We've had some really good ones from our last few guests. So if you haven't listened to those podcasts, go check them out. Eric, your recommendation for this week?
It's right over there, actually. I'm reading this book right now called Noise, it's by Daniel Kahneman of Kahneman and Tversky fame. It's a book where they try to understand where errors come from. And it's not perfect. Like they make a statement and I forgot to look up this guy's name, but like they made a statement in the book that says correlation does not imply causation, but causation implies correlation, which is actually false. Like I was at a conference in 2014 where a guy like built this dynamical system and he ran out the time series and they were two perfectly uncorrelated blobs, but they were obviously caused by each other because it was a system that he devised. So there's like, and they're not statisticians. So there's a little bit of colloquial, stuff that you have to print over, but I'm somebody, I'm somebody that's like I'm not going to read somebody's book because they're incorrect in some things. Like there's obviously value in everything that people do. I like it. I thought one of the great anecdotes, by the way, which was that judges give out harsher sentences in the Monday and the week after a local team loses, which can only mean one thing.
Wow.
It can only mean one thing. Stay out of trouble, Pittsburgh.
I can't follow that one up. That was too good. I knew it was coming, and
delivery matters. I mean, I didn't deliver the hope selling thing as well as I could have. I felt like I had to deliver that one better.
Someone here pointing out that judges are also harsher before lunch, which is funny. Maybe I should make my my recommendation then like intermittent fasting, but which I do think works for some people. I personally do it like it makes my life way easier, and I just eat between broadly like 12 and 7 or 1 and 7. But I'm not sure I want to make that my recommendation here for today. I think what I'll do for my recommendation is, because I'm on the West Coast right now, I'm going to toss out a 2 food related recommendations for you guys. The first is, if you're in the Orange County area, great sushi place called Genkai, Genkai, small little place, hole in the wall, fantastic hand rolls. Just go there and just order hand rolls. Have them come out as soon as you finish, and just ask the waitress or waiter what he recommends, and just get them. The second thing, if you're not in the Orange County area, is this. It's a little hack here. It's actually pretty popular, but maybe you haven't heard of it. Sweet potatoes. I like to add them to my salad. Freeze them before you cook them. Freeze them for an hour, then throw them in at like 425 for an hour. It'll change the game, especially if you buy like the Japanese sweet potatoes, either the white flesh or the purple flesh ones. I promise you will not be disappointed. Very different recommendations.
Our mutual friend Matthew Collar is in Orange County or in LA visiting family.
Okay.
He gave his WNBA tickets to me and my daughter for tonight. And I told him this is a secondary recommendation because you gave it to me when I was there. I gave it to him with Salt and Straw, the ice cream place.
Yes.
We're paying it forward here. And
it is the number
if you pay
one
forward a recommendation from this show. Let us know, because it's kind of fun. We're just people helping people, powerful stuff.
I will stand by this. The number one ice cream place in the world is Salt and Straw Creamery. It's on the West Coast. You should go get some. It's in LA. There's multiple places in LA. I think it's originally Portland, Oregon. One day we'll just do a food podcast.
You're a man of the people. I know last week you gave out like a $500 cologne on the show.
It was not $500.
But
come on.
It was great.
Come on. It was not $500. It's like $195, and you can make cologne go a long way. Invest in yourself. Place a smart bet and go buy yourself cologne that doesn't make you smell like crap. I promise it'll pay off for you in the long run. That's our show. We're done. Thank you guys for hanging out. We love you all. We'll be back on Wednesday. Peace out.